Hello everyone, welcome to today's video. We're going to be talking about the Rostermania going on right now, and we're going to be focusing on Europe, because I think Europe is a region that's often been underrepresented during the Overwatch League era, and now with everything going back to regional, we see a lot of that Overwatch League talent going back to Europe. We see a lot of investment in Europe, especially in the form of some of the Saudi organisations bringing a lot of money. And we also get some really strong performances from the World Cup that really validate a lot of the European metas and comps that they've been playing for so long in terms of Brawl. Saudi and Finland's success, I think, really opened the door, and even London's success in Overwatch League really opened the door for those sort of comps to be legitimate ones you can play regardless of what the patch is. So I think there's a lot of good reasons to be interested in Europe. I think there's a lot of talent in Europe. So I think it's really interesting to do a bit of theory crafting and what's the best roster we can build from all these pieces. Now, I should say before we get into it, and this isn't intended to be a leak video where I'm going to tell you behind the scenes gossip. So we're only going to work with known facts. We're not going to use any back channels or secret information to reveal anything. We're going to talk about the established teams. We're going to talk about a couple of the rumours and if they make sense or not, and then theory craft what is actually the best way to make a team in Europe to compete both domestically and internationally. So if we get into it, you'll see I've made this very nice spreadsheet. And this spreadsheet is a list of, in my opinion, all the European players that I think sort of come to mind when I think about building a team. Now, I probably missed somebody out, and there's probably somebody sitting there going, "Where's so-and-so?" Or someone sitting there really upset and they didn't make the shortlist. So if I did miss anyone, let me know in the comments. I'm sure you guys will. But this is the list I have. We've obviously crossed some people out because some people are on established teams. Also, Psycho's not available, so we've crossed him out for now as well. But we should really start by, let's look at the established teams, where their strengths will be, and if it makes sense for sort of rosters they've built. So the first team is the London team, and it obviously makes a lot of sense that they've put this team back together. They had a lot of success in Overwatch League, and they've done an upgrade in many ways on main support by adding Astro over Admiral. I think Astro's got a bit more flexibility. He's also one of the best Lucios in the world, and for a team that's going to play almost exclusively Lucio comps, it seems a really good thing. They've also imported Landon, who will be playing on ping, but he is a Floridian man, so as long as he can avoid getting eaten by an alligator or something, I think he'll be really okay to play on ping. And obviously, once he gets to the LAN stage, he'll be on LAN anyway. So as long as they can get in that top 3 berth, which I think this roster can do, they'll be able to get Landon on LAN, and it'll be really fine. So this team, a lot of obvious choices why the band got back together. I think they'll do really well, and probably one of the favourites at the moment. Below them, we obviously have the Twisted Minds core, which is KSA, UB, and Quartz, the world champions, alongside a pretty diverse backline in terms of they've got 2 flex supports and a main support. Kellex, obviously a player who was assistant coach for that World Cup team and has played with this Twisted Minds core for a very long time. So I think culturally and team dynamic-wise, Kellex is actually a pretty fundamental part of this team. And I think even when we look at this team as a whole, you probably look at the backline as the weaker part of this, even though they've got Slay and Sky. I think they both sit in the category of average European flex support. I don't even mean that in a disrespectful way, just in they're not standout players on their role in the same way maybe KSA and Quartz are on their heroes. But when I look at, say, the main support role, it's like, well, could you potentially upgrade? I think like Funny Astro very much sits, if we're going to power rank all the main supports in Europe, Funny Astro sits way above everyone else. And then everyone else is kind of in the same category, honestly. And there's not a huge gap between the rest of it. So I think Kellex sits in that sort of tier below Astro category. So I think it's really fine. I think there's probably an argument you can make that, and we'll get onto the Rock imports that they've made, but on the presumption that you have a pretty established core, could you upgrade the backline by adding a Korean import? Obviously, that would cost money and housing and funding, but the presumption with a lot of these orgs is there is always money and funding and housing available. So you look at what Rock have done with some of their imports, and you ask the question, could Twisted Minds just make this roster better if instead of Slay and Sky, maybe even Kellex, they just brought in some Korean flex supports? I think you can make a really good argument, and that would be the case, and it would be a really interesting upgrade for them to add. You have to bear in mind, on paper, it will be an upgrade, but you have to bear in mind the cohesiveness of the team when you do that. Like, I think I'd be really surprised if Kellex, even if they did have infinite money and they could sign, I mean, maybe if you can sign Chill and Fielder, you just do it, right? But even if you could sign a really talented main support, I don't think you'd replace Kellex. I think he's actually quite fundamental to this roster and how it works on a sort of team dynamic basis. I think with the flex supports, that's when we may make a case of like, who could we get in? Like maybe Shu is too big a name, right? And we'll end up on a top Korean team. But there's just definitely some flex supports we can look at, I think, from Korea that would just upgrade this team. So, I mean, obviously, there's no rumours that's happening, and I don't think it will happen. I think this might just be the core they stick with. This is obviously the core they've gone to their boot camp with. But it's an interesting concept, and I think when we look at what Rock Esports have done, you do have to wonder now, actually, does the power in Saudi Arabia start to shift from Twisted Minds to Rock Esports with these upgrades that Rock have made? Potentially. And I think one thing, we need to talk about Rock Esports, because it's so interesting. Because Checkmate is the Overwatch League champion. He is one of the best flex DPS in the world, and he's also one of the few flex DPS in the world, because even if we look at people like Proper and Stalker, they're really good on particular heroes, but the Mei category of stuff has always been a weak point for these people, but for Checkmate, it's not. Checkmate's actually super well-rounded, and the fact that Checkmate is a strong Mei as well and has good English skills, he's really the perfect person to import. It was a real surprise Checkmate wasn't, I mean obviously he was considered, but he didn't end up on that Toronto team. So the fact that he's ended up on Rock is really strange, and we'll see this play out in OWCS, and we'll see this play out in the Saudi E-League as well, but does the power dynamic in Saudi Arabia shift from where it's been the whole time essentially in this Twisted Minds core to this Rock Esports core? I mean, potentially. We should probably talk about the other spots as well. So obviously Checkmate's a good signing. Very hard to sign Checkmate, and it turned out to be a bad signing for any team in the world. But they've also got Izzyaki. Now, Izzyaki had success with Boston, but I don't think anyone really looks at Izzyaki as a elite tier flex support anymore, not in the upper echelons like Fielder or Shu or those type of players. I think he's solid, and I think especially when you look at the flex supports in Europe, there's a real argument, and it's a bit patchy for flex supports in Europe compared to, say, somewhere like Korea or something. Or even NA, where they have a pretty long list. I mean, even London have obviously actually imported a flex support to try and solve a bit of this problem as well. So I think Izzyaki is actually a really fine signing. Fills a role that maybe would be a weak point for the team otherwise. I think TVNT and Rojo are actually two of the biggest upcoming players in the entire region right now. So super excited to see TVNT and Rojo paired up with Checkmate again and have a chance to really see how far this core can go. Oyon Lucio, I'm not as excited about him as TVNT and Rojo, but I think he's solid, and like we said, I think does he just sort of sit in this category of okay main supports and not behind Astro? Probably it's okay. The other teams that have registered for OWCS already are Team Peps and Arya. Now, Team Peps, a lot of names people recognise here. It's Bembest and FD God back together again. They've got Naga and they've got Pac, and they've added Kaneo here. And Kaneo is actually a flex support of all the sort of up-and-coming players who haven't maybe been given a shot on a proper team. I actually think Kaneo is someone who's deserving of one. So it's maybe isn't a top team. I think one of the problems Team Peps is going to have is that their strength. So can we get Ben on Rhine or Orisa or some kind of brawl tank? And can we get FD God on Lucio? Okay, reasonable. We probably can. It's Europe after all, right? The problem is the strengths they have are the same strengths all these other teams have. These are the sort of comps that Rock want to play, that Twisted Minds want to play, that London want to play. So their unique strengths are probably actually more suited to a more mixed field of competition than it will be in Europe. So obviously, if they overperform, they can upset teams. You never want to rule a team out. I think this team will be top 8 pretty consistently. But how many upsets will they cause? I'm a bit more sceptical. I'll have to wait and see on that one. The team that might cause upsets, though, is Arya. So this, if you watch Flash Ops, this is essentially the entire same roster. Kai will still be there doing horrendous things to people on Junkrat. This is a team that people are going to hate playing. This team should be top. I'd be really surprised if this team don't get out of a switch stage in the top 8. I think they'll get top 8, and I think they can cause teams some real problems. Because once we get to group stage, when we get to knockouts, and you don't know who you're going to be playing the next day, so you've got to maybe prepare a very standard game against Twisted Minds. But maybe we've got to also prepare for a really wacky game against Arya. And you don't have the time to prep, the time to figure stuff out, the time to it can get really, really messy for teams. And I think Arya is actually going to cause headaches for all these top teams. And we're going to see some scalps. They're going to take some scalps from some of these bigger teams. and they can really make the bracket difficult for people. So I'm actually really excited to see. Oh yeah, I hope they do get out of Swiss as I expect. They make some people's lives hell in the later tournaments. So that's sort of where the pieces fall right now. I think when we think about, well, there's still obviously a lot of really talented players left. How can we build a team? I think there's two main ways you can go about building a team in Europe and trying to build the best team. You either do kind of what London have done and you go, what if we just take a core and add a couple of pieces? So the obvious core to take from, since London's taken and Saudi Arabia's taken, is Finland. So you take something like Vessler, you take Cloud, you take Sauna, you take probably Ghost91 over Mikji. I think Ghost91 is like a more rounded flex support. I think he's super talented. Then you maybe take Massa, right? You got this finished core and then we go, can we maybe add a couple of pieces that are upgrades? You know, you start to look at maybe an SR peak check team. It's like, oh, maybe a Fi over Cloud starts to seem quite reasonable. Maybe a Cookie over Sauna or even a Kai over Sauna starts to make a lot of sense. And you can start to see how you can maybe upgrade this team into like a bit of a better core. The other way to approach it, which I think was rumoured or was attempted by some people at a time, was you look at a region and go, who's the best player? And you go, well, it's Kevster, right? It's really hard to argue that it isn't just Kevster. So, okay, can we build a team to help Kevster succeed? Kevster's best heroes, probably Tracer and Genji. He's obviously good at all of them, but Tracer and Genji, like, if we can get him on those heroes, that's a real win condition, not just for games, but for the major. So then, well, if we want to play Tracer and Genji, then we probably want to play either like a Queen comp or a Divey comp. So who are the best people for that? I mean, it's probably Chase, right? In terms of if you want to be playing like Monkey or Doomfist or stuff. I mean, JK obviously fits the archetype here as well, but I think Chase has a bit more flexibility, and I think honestly on Winston, probably actually better. Then you probably want to pair him with a hit scan. Kai becomes the obvious choice, right? But you could quite easily probably drop any of these hit scans in and have an okay time. Support-wise, this is where it gets interesting, because we talked about maybe on main support, there's the Astro tier, then there's the everyone else tier. Well, actually, if you want to be playing Dive a lot, you kind of just want to be playing like Anna Brig, Anna Kiri. Now, maybe the best way to go about enabling someone like Kev is to take Gala and take Ghost and just have a double flex support backline. So obviously they had problems in Flash Ops, where they had to put Gala on Lucio, and Gala doesn't look very good at Lucio, as most people who aren't a Lucio main don't look good on Lucio. So it's a problem, right? But could you just get around that for the most part? I mean, if you want, you can maybe even do something where you just get getting crispy, or you just yoink Admiral out of college and put him there as well as an option. But something like that where you do like a free support system. So you have a Lucio guy or something you can drop in. But for the most part, you're playing double flex on a lot of these maps. I can really see a system like that working. And I think it's really possible, but I think you hit the problem that wellness roster, something like this sort of dive focused around Kev could work domestically. Once you get to the international stage and you have to then pit this team on dive against Falcons, for example, and you're playing a dive mirror, it's going to feel really bad, right? It's going to feel really bad. Maybe you can make like a sort of turbocharged version of this roster if you had imports. Like imagine if instead of Chase Torch, this was Fearless or something, right? And then maybe instead of we even had like, I don't know, Shu is the obvious choice on flex support, but maybe it's like he'd rather stay in Korea. But you do something like that and maybe you can make a pretty big super team, but that would require a lot of org support and housing and to import the Koreans and all of this. Like the levels of support Toronto Defiant have got, which I don't know if that's really possible right now. So maybe this is the best dive team you can kind of put together out of the European pieces. But I'd be remiss if I don't actually talk about the main rumour on the street, which is actually a combination of these two ideas, where you take some of this finished core and you take, I guess, the top and the tail of it, and the main tank and the main support, and then you put Kevin Kai in the middle of it. And then you add Ghost91 now. The Ghost91 addition seems really logical. I think he is actually the best up-and-coming flex support in Europe. Kevin Kai, obviously really good. Vessler, really good. Massa, an interesting pickup, especially when the rumour is that Goomba's coaching this team, and it's like, well, I thought Goomba always preferred fresher, younger, hungrier players, not established vets, which Massa very much falls to the category of. But I think on paper, this team is a bit weird. It's a little bit weird. I start to think of like, well, Massa probably wants to play Lucio, right? But how do we get Kev onto Tracer or Genji then? And is Vessler obviously, he can play Diva, but he Monkey and Doom, I don't really think I've seen it out of Vestler here. So big questions there. I wonder if actually, if suddenly if you were to add like the SRP check variant here, where you add a Gala, and you go, oh, okay, now I can see it. Now we can maybe play double flex. We could play like a double flex diva, like an Ana Zen or a Bap Kiri or something Florida used to do, right? And then this is a diva, and then we can have Kev on Tracer and Kai on Sojourn, or whatever hit scan is the flavor of the month. Then we have a Lucio guy or a Brig guy for times. I could see a version of that working, but I think without that Gala piece, it gets a little bit messy. I think in terms of how this roster can cohesively play comps, now play to Kevster's strengths, without just having to play Rush and put Kevster on May, and then you're probably not getting the same amount out of Kevster. I mean, another way to do this is and this is obviously this is like the greedy way to do it. If you have the resources, is you just maybe add someone like Phi as like a May player or something, just to fill that gap, or maybe you even add someone like Sauna. If you add Sauna, maybe there's a real chance Sauna might even actually be a better main than Kevster. Maybe there's an argument that neither of them is, not a strength for either of them. But if you add Sauna, you could then do like Tracer Echo could really come on the cards, and you could like work around the fact that Kai's kind of stuck in the hit scan. Maybe that's possible, but I think the really important part for him to add is this second flex support. I think it enables Kev to play a lot more of the heroes he's good at, and without that, we can maybe see them struggling. So let's presume for the most part, if we presume that rumor's true, and that this team is locked in, this makes Europe really competitive, right? Like we have this team, London, Twisted Mind, these are probably our top three. But then Rock Esports is a real dark horse, right? Team Peps will be in and around there. Arya can cause some upsets. But even with all that in mind, we've just 6 pretty good teams. There's actually still a load of players left. Like if I was to make a sort of best of the rest pieces here, I think the fact that Chase Torch hasn't been more seriously considered in any of these teams, maybe it sort of makes sense because there's a lot of decent main tanks in Europe, but Chase is super talented. He's good at a lot of the heroes that other tanks aren't in Europe, and I'm actually really excited to see him play more. Then who would you pair with that? I mean, someone like, obviously Ramon's maybe the obvious choice because he can play a very good Tracer and all of this. Obviously Ramona's in America and Collegiate right now, which could cause some problems, so maybe someone like Sauna actually becomes a more sort of localized version of that. Likewise, hit scan wise, Cookie probably in terms of form is probably the best hit scan out of all the remaining pieces. It's obviously a very competitive category, but I think Cookie's very good. But I think quite easily Shockwave or Hybrid could fall into this role as well. There's probably an argument in some ways in terms of the team dynamic and the vocality. Like someone who's quite vocal, someone like Hybrid is probably way more vocal than a lot of these players as well. Something like that can probably really help balance out some of these rosters. Likewise then, if Gala doesn't end up on this team, well then Gala's the obvious choice, right? Really super talented. We can maybe do a similar thing where, again, maybe if you get Admiral out of college in America or Redbirds, you'd say Admiral was probably the best spot for here. Otherwise, someone like Crispy, probably really satisfactory as well. You maybe have the same argument that actually, if we have Chase and Sword and we've got like a Tracer Winston player, do we actually want a double flex again? Do we want to extend this and get someone else in? I mean, Kaneo in some ways I think would actually really fit this sort of double flex role really well. I think Kaneo's got a very good Kiriko. I think he's good at a lot of the right heroes. Obviously, even someone like Kronos can actually fit this role as well, where he can play a bit of Bap, a bit of Lucio, and he can sort of double up. So it's another option that teams have. But I think there's probably a version of this you can make that can compete. It gets a little bit messy. There's maybe an argument that maybe you just actually want something like this, but the worry with something like this is I think you've got a Brawl team, right? And then you've got the Team Peps problem of you're good at Brawl, but is everyone else just better at Brawl than you? Have everyone else just got the same strengths but more? So I think that's maybe a bit risky. I think I'd like to see a roster with more variety, something where it is like Sauna, or maybe you take Cloud or something as well. And you do something Cloud or Phi as well. I mean, if I had to pick between Cloud and Phi, I'd probably pick Phi, honestly. But you do something like this, so you have all the May type options open to you as well, but you also have the option to just play more divey ones, and you play a little bit more variety. Because again, I think if you're London or your Twisted Minds or you're this team, you have to think about domestic success, but you also have to have a big picture. I need to think about international success. I think if you know sort of like best of the rest roster, or maybe even like these rosters, We actually just you want to be in that top three. It's more important probably to make that top three than it is to necessarily win the win the big international event. So I think actually there's an argument that building a team with some variety, if you don't have access to the rest of these players, where you can play a little bit more of the dive or something, actually can really work in your favour. And then you probably still need it for some maps, right? So you probably still have someone like a Crispy or something in, so you can still play those Lucio comps. But those are my ideas. Those are my ideas and my thoughts. Obviously, all of the possibilities are really open. There's so many good options within Europe, and I think like some of these players we've not even really talked about. I didn't really talk about Shockwave or Hybrid. I think who could really be in contention for a lot of these spots. Didn't even really talk about Cloud that much, who obviously did have a lot of success playing that May role for Finland. So I think there's actually a lot of talent to be had here in Europe. There's definitely more players that I didn't even list as well. So I think even if we just take my theory craft, we've got the 5 established teams, the Rumoured Kevster Kai core, the best of the rest. We're already at 7 teams. There's only top 8 get to the European competition, so we can actually have a really competitive field in Europe. So I think it's a really exciting time to be a European player, really dangerous time to be a European player as well because there's so much competition, but it's a really exciting time to watch European Overwatch, a really exciting time to be a fan. I think there's a lot of talent on show. I think it's really interesting to see what will work more. Will the sort of Kev Kai super team style team work more, or will the boys back together team work more? Or will Twisted Minds win just because Quartz and Yubi and KSA are really good? Or maybe Rock will win because they've imported Checkmate and Izayaki. There's actually so many interesting storylines in Europe. So I think hopefully this was a fun sort of way to craft around why teams should make certain decisions or potential options or hypotheticals that could exist. There's so many options, and I'm sure I've missed loads of them. So if you have any you want to add or you think I've missed or you think are worth discussing, leave them in the comments, share your ideas. I think this is a super fun exercise. And we will be doing this for the other regions as well, so for Korea and North America. So stay tuned for that. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.